Lovely to see everybody this morning. Welcome to our New Approaches to Collecting Sporting Heritage series of webinars. For those of you who I've not met before, my name is Fran Stovold and I'm the Workforce Development Lead for Sporting Heritage. So I look after all the webinar programme, the networks and the conference. And if you don't have our conference dates in your diary, it's the Wednesday the 20th and Thursday the 21st of October. And there'll be more news about that coming out soon if you're signed up to our newsletter. Just a few bits of housekeeping to start with, and then I shall hand over to Chris and Jenny to run the session. As always, if your tech fails at any point, please do just join back in with the link that you've got. I'll keep an eye on the waiting room. If our tech fails at this end, I will email everybody and let you know whether we can get it up and running within the same time frame for this webinar or whether we need to reschedule. We are recording the session, so if you don't want to be recorded, please do feel free to switch your cameras off. And just to let you know, and I think I said in the advance email that went out, we've got a Q&A session towards the end of today's webinar. So I hope you're all feeling happy to share your experiences. I think that's all I need to say from my point of view. So Chris, I hand over to you to start the session.
Thanks, Fran. Yeah, and thank you everyone for taking time to join us today. Really appreciate it. This is quite a experimental workshop, I guess, in that we've not tried this approach to talking about collecting and specifically community-driven collecting yet so far in the project. So just to give you a bit of context and background, so I'm going to share my slides before I begin. Can everyone see those? Great. So this is the first in a series of 3 workshops that have been developed on the back of a recent project undertaken by Sporting Heritage called Ignored Sporting Heritage, which I know some of you will be very aware of. In a nutshell, these workshops are all about how we collect and preserve the nation's sporting heritage, how we involve communities and audiences in this process, and how we ensure that our national sporting heritage represents the rich and diverse history of sport in Britain. These workshops will be taking place across the next this Friday and the next 2 Fridays, and each will feature a unique project that is looking to develop new approaches to democratic and community-driven heritage collecting. If you are able to make all 3 workshops, and please do, as I'm hoping that together they should offer quite a broad perspective on the issue. But if this is the only one you can make, then you will certainly get something from this, I can guarantee. So I'll just give a bit of background to the workshops first and how they've been developed. After this, I'll pass on to Jenny Vickers, who's with us today from the Ahmed Iqbal Ullah Race Relations Resource Centre in Manchester, who were talking about the fascinating Coming in from the Cold project. And then for the last bit of the workshop this morning, we're hoping to hand over to you. And if you have questions or comments that you want to raise around working with communities that you can feel you can kind of get some support or some information, then I'm hoping that you might be able to bring those and we can share and discuss. So just to begin with, I'll just give a bit of a background to the project that kind of spawned these workshops. So the Ignored Sporting Heritage project ran from January to May this year, and it looked to explore the state of diverse ethnic representation in the UK's sporting heritage collections. The project looked to gather quite a range of perspective on the issue. So it interviewed representatives from obviously heritage organisations, but also grassroots sports clubs, charities, community organisations that work to confront racism in sport and promote inclusivity, as well as academic specialists in race and sport. The project ultimately concluded that despite the rich and diverse heritage of sport in Britain, ethnically diverse communities are critically underrepresented in sporting heritage collections. I think you might be able to correct me on this, Fran, but I think the report should be made available at some point soon. I know it's kind of going through final kind of smartening up process. Keep an eye out for the report when it's available, as it goes into this in a lot more detail and gives a lot more background, obviously, to what we tried to do. The project also looked to understand the reasons why ethnically diverse communities aren't well represented in sporting collections, and to identify what we can do as heritage professionals to build a more inclusive and representative picture of the history of sport in Britain. Some of the issues that we identified are quite unique to sporting heritage. So we observed, for example, that sporting heritage collections largely tend to be built around the administration of sport and sports governing bodies. And we identified much fewer collections that explore sport from a kind of wider social historical perspective, or that focus, say, on grassroots sport or fans and supporters. So this means generally from our conclusion that sporting heritage collections tend to reflect the inequalities that are existent within sport itself, and don't really represent diversity of participation at other levels of sport and within wider sporting communities. We also identified a few issues that apply to the whole of the museums and archives sector, undoubtedly. For example, one of the significant issues in archives and museums today are the structural inequalities within the sector that unquestionably impact on the prioritization and interpretation of heritage. So, for example, according to Archives and Records Association survey data, 97% of people who work in the archive sector are white. And the situation is similar in museums. And what this means is that the lack of diversity among heritage professionals limits the ability of museums to safeguard and tell the stories of those that they're trying to represent, and also to challenge their own biases institutionally and in terms of their practice. There's also increasing attention being paid to how museums and archives actually collect their collections. So, for example, it's widely observed that museums tend to rely on quite reactive means of collecting. So, for example, collecting in response to offers of donation, rather than kind of actively seeking to fill gaps and to address inequalities in their collections. Obviously, this enables museums and archives to acquire collections at quite little cost when they're kind of being offered for donation. But what we observed is that it almost exclusively favors those groups who have an existing identification or connection with heritage, and that kind of see museums and archives as a kind of natural home for their collections. And it doesn't enable people who don't see themselves represented in collections to contribute and to get involved. And altogether, it almost creates a bit of a feedback loop where kind of collecting the same groups of people. So these challenges around inclusivity and representation need to be addressed, obviously, in order to make sure heritage remains relevant, that it remains accurate reflection of society, and that it remains insightful. And sport in particular is arguably the most high profile public forum for discussion about race and racism in our society. And this has been evidenced yet again in the fallout from the Euro 2020 final, and how sport is such a focus for discussions on racism and on, positive approaches to race. And sport, undoubtedly has unique insights to offer on a wide variety of issues relating to race, racism, community cohesion, migration, culture. But without the collections that represent the diversity of involvement in British sport, we can't really begin to explore or adequately tell these stories. So we're hoping to look at how we kind of create new approaches that can build on these collections. Obviously, you'll all be aware that this requires resources in some capacity, whether that's money or whether that's time, staffing, research. But just to point out that in there's a quote here from the Museum Association, who in their latest collecting strategy, which is called Empowering Collections, which is really worth a read as a kind of introductory piece on community-driven collecting. Museum Association point out that collecting strategically in partnership with museum users and communities can be carried out at quite low cost, but with a really substantial social impact. And some museums, you know, are admittedly kind of better resourced museums, largely have developed quite groundbreaking new approaches to working with communities on collecting. So, for example, one that's cited very frequently is Birmingham Museums and their Collecting Birmingham project, which was in part funded by the Heritage Lottery Fund. And this was a really, really kind of community entrenched project that looked to kind of explore the history of Birmingham from a vast variety of perspectives. And these do offer kind of useful case studies, even though, as I said, they are often kind of there's more well-resourced museums that are leading on these. And you know, we're aware that it's not straightforward for all organizations to achieve this level of community engagement, and that there are barriers, both real and perceived, that prohibit organizations from reaching out and opening dialogue with communities that they might not have engaged with before. So, for example, throughout the project, we were made aware of a number of obstacles, from obviously lack of capacity and lack of resourcing, which is an issue we all face constantly in this climate. But right down to, you know, confidence, language, you know, how we talk to different communities, and, you know, what is appropriate language, and you know, how we kind of develop and kind of learn and build those connections. So these workshops have kind of emerged from this situation and been kind of designed in response to this. Just they're not intended to offer kind of hard and fast solutions to engaging and building relationships with communities. There isn't, you know, one size fits all approach to community engagement. And, you know, everyone, as I said, every organization has unique challenges, unique opportunities. So what we've tried to do here is just offer space for discussion and for questions, if you have them. And we'll try our best to kind of at least talk about those and share our perspectives and opinions. And what we're going to do is just offer a bit of space for reflection on how we collect sporting heritage, and to think about what we can do to overcome challenges around representation and inclusivity. And, you know, and hopefully there will be a few kind of actual practical insights that we can pick up along the way. And yeah, and we're really, really lucky to be joined across these three workshops by three fantastic speakers from within sporting heritage and the wider heritage sector, who will be sharing with us projects that have looked to develop new community-driven approaches to collecting and preserving heritage. And each of these projects offers really unique and valuable insights. Just another note as well, that even though the Ignored Sporting Heritage Project was exclusively looking at ethnic diversity, these workshops aren't solely geared around ethnic diversity and representation, but we want to use them to think more widely around how we involve different communities and how we kind of engage different voices and perspectives in our collecting, and how we use this to build collections that are truly representative. But saying that, this first workshop will have a slightly more stronger focus on diverse ethnic representation, and specifically how we reach out and work with those communities who aren't represented in our existing collections. More importantly, how we support them to tell their own stories and to safeguard their own heritage. So to shine a light on these issues, I'm going to hand over to our guest speaker today, who's Jenny Vickers, who is Community Engagement Manager at the Ahmed Iqbal Ullah Race Relations Resource Centre and Education Trust. It's always that last bit that I'm never sure if I've got right or not. In Manchester, and has recently worked on the Trust's really unique and valuable Coming In From the Cold project. So Jenny, I'll hand over to you, if that's okay.
Yeah, thank you. I'm just going to try and adjust my screen. Okay, hello. I work for the Armadick Balola Education Trust, which is a small charity affiliated to the Race Relations Resource Centre. The Race Relations Resource Centre is funded by the University of Manchester. It's actually a small special collection within the University of Manchester Library, but we're housed in the public library in the centre of Manchester, and we're an open access collection, so we're available for both academic students and the wider public. And the Education Trust was set up to initiate projects to both engage audiences and do collecting work with them to increase our collections. So it's quite like this nice sort of synergy between collecting and engagement work and research. So we set up the Coming In From the Cold project 4 years ago, and it came out of our own practice as an organisation working with diverse communities in Manchester. We were being approached informally by groups and being referred to by the Heritage Lottery Fund, but we weren't being paid for any of that work, and it was increasingly taking up a lot of time. So me and the former director put in a funding application, which was successful, and it was received in 2 parts. So the first phase was a research and development phase, during which I undertook an audit of which projects had happened across Greater Manchester and what had happened to the materials developed through those projects. And we also looked at collections and how reflective they were of local communities, and we commissioned a researcher to map ethnic diversity around Greater Manchester and give us an idea of where different communities were concentrated and whether those local authorities were again reflecting that change in demographics within their archive collections. So we did that piece of work, and off the back of that we got funding for a phase 2, which was a 3-year project to develop work to fill some of those gaps in collections, to increase visibility of diverse communities in archives across Greater Manchester, to raise awareness of what archives are and the value of long-term sort of work on short-term projects, and to try and encourage more project work in inactive boroughs across Greater Manchester. So we're just coming to the end of that. It's actually my last day on the project after 4 years. It's been very intense, but we've I've just been adding up and passing different types of information onto our evaluator, and it looks like we've got 27 collections in-house as a result of the project, and another 13 that are, because of COVID, still in the process of donating to us. So it looks like we'll have collected around 40 different archives as a result of the project by the end of this year. And the work has been extremely diverse. So it ranges from work with community organisations and archiving their kind of organisational papers, to actually developing heritage projects either in partnership with communities or as a heritage kind of support partner. We also work with individuals, we work with academics, we provide opportunities for student placements through the University of Manchester, and all as much as possible of that activity is turned into historic archive material so that it can be accessed in the future by researchers. We haven't specifically worked on sporting heritage, but loads of the projects that we've worked with do include sport as one of the subjects that they cover. And what I've found through my sort of 11 years working in this organisation on and off is that projects have moved from the kind of subjects they were exploring 11 years ago to different ways of recording aspects of their identity and heritage. So initially we were getting very celebratory projects, and they were around isn't it great to be, and then Chinese or Sudanese, and very celebratory projects, and they were almost always about preserving cultural heritage from generations that were becoming elderly and worried about passing on traditions to subsequent generations living here in Manchester. More recently, we've had projects that look very specifically at certain topics, but we always try and encourage them to explore those topics within a life story format. And most groups tend to use oral history to do that. And we ask for that kind of approach so that the resource material has the widest appeal to an audience in future, and so that the motivations for getting involved in particular activities are recorded and explored, as well as the actual experience itself. And I'm just thinking of projects that have looked at sporting heritage. So we did a project with the Yemeni community in Salford right at the beginning of my time with the Trust, and lots of the Yemenis that settled in Salford remembered going to Bellevue to watch boxing matches, and Muhammad Ali was a big figure in their lives that was cited as a hero and someone to look up to, and they went to see boxing and wrestling quite a lot. More latterly, we also tried to document sports teams that the Yemeni community were involved with, like there's a football team that the community association support, and we tried to get images and documents relating to that activity to show involvement in that sport as well. More recently, I'm coming in from Nicole, we've been in touch with Bolton Asian Migration Project, who have done an extensive photographic project collecting through Facebook and social media memories and photographs of people from South Asia that settled in Bolton, mainly as a result of coming to work in the cotton trade. And they also documented the social lives of people, which involved sporting heritage. So cricket, most popular was cricket teams, but also kind of other sports like street games and football and that kind of thing as well. And that they've turned that into 2 volumes of published images, which they've given out to local libraries, but I think you can also buy copies from them as well. So we've explored a huge range of subjects which involve sporting heritage, but what I would really like to see in future, and I would see as a big development, is groups actually coming with sport as a subject that they want to explore in depth, because I think as groups become more confident about their identity and sense of self, they'll explore the different aspects of their community and not see it as kind of one tick box exercise, but as a rich field that they can keep going back and mining for resources. And sport is something that has brought people together, has kind of made people feel part of a community, has showed shared interest in something. So it would be really nice to see that develop more in the future. I don't know if you want me to talk a little bit more about some of the support that coming in from the Cold has offered to community groups in order to help them engage with their heritage more generally.
That would be really useful if that's okay, because I know that, yeah, there's a lot of really practical stuff that comes out of that.
Sure. So typically groups come to us with a very rough idea for a project. And the first thing we do is sit down with them and discuss their ideas. Quite often they need refining a little bit because they could be like 3 or 4 projects actually. So what we tend to do is sit down and look at how much time they want to dedicate to the project, what sort of vague budget they've got in mind, and what's possible within those limitations. We also try and help them develop a clear narrative for their project. So rather than tackling like 10 things and struggling to find an overriding theme, we might encourage them to explore one in depth and think about how to show evidence of need for their application. We might work with them on developing some research that supports their application, and we usually write a support letter as well, talking about how this project would fill a gap in our archives or address an audience that's underrepresented. And then we, once the projects have got funding and they're into the facilitation, we provide loads of different types of support. So that can be loaning equipment, training people in oral history and reminiscence. We also run workshops on scanning images and how to do sort of pre-archiving work before you hand over your materials, so that you organise a collection and list it and think of keywords to explain some of the topics and ideas in your project. And we try, once the material is handed over, the archivist tries to work in partnership with the community group, so it's not framed according to our organisation, but we carry on using the skill and knowledge that has developed during the project to complete the process. We also do things like, we have free rooms at Central Library that groups can use to run events or meetings. We offer them help to disseminate the material that they've collected, so we co-curate exhibitions which used to be on digital displays in Central Library, but more recently have moved online because of COVID issues. We sometimes produce leaflets or publications with groups, or we offer them help to do that themselves. I'm really into oral history, and I support groups with the documentation of that, because we used to get audio recordings, but there were no accompanying paperwork. So I do a lot of work to make sure we have permissions in place, that all of the material collected is recorded on a log, that we have an index, which is like a subject. We insist on a subject list that explains what subjects are covered in the recording, with timestamps, so that in the future future researchers can look for specific subjects within a recording rather than having to listen to a whole hour or two. We do other things like I also help people produce a summary, which is more like a written biography of the interviewee, and if they produce those, we bind them into volumes for the library which people can browse, so that people are more likely to come across the archive accidentally and ask to listen to the longer interviews, because there's different ways of accessing the information. And we help them share information through our social media channels, so it reaches a wider audience, and we try and get them to think about a wider audience rather than just speaking to within their own community, but to speak to a broader audience and try and help people understand and engage with the things that they're trying to address. We also help with evaluation. We offer advice on the legal permission forms that people are using. We've developed a load of resources which are available on our website. There's a link to the Race Archive website, which has a resources page and lots of downloadable things for people to use. So there's an oral history toolkit on there. There's examples of recording agreements and index templates, all that kind of material. We did, while the project was live, run the Coming In From the Cold project and a blog, but it's kind of, most of the materials now migrated onto the Education Trust website, which is the Race Archive one. So it will be maintained in the future. And the toolkit is a little bit out of date, but I've been working on updating that. So hopefully a second edition should be available by the end of the year to download as well. So we also have physical exhibition spaces in the library, and we try and help people understand the purpose of archiving. That's been one of the big outcomes of the project, is to make that a bit less mysterious. And so we got a student placement to make a short film about what is an archive, which, if you look at the Race Relation channel on the Armadit Balola Race Relations channel on YouTube, you'll find a short video, and it just shows people what's in our archive and explains who uses it and who's donated to it and what the value of doing that is. And we did that because a lot of groups were putting things online and saying they'd archive their project, and we were trying to explain the difference between, you know, sharing and storing information and for the long term. So we've done a vast amount of things on our project, and I think the communities that we've worked with are more kind of geared up to thinking long term and recording and sharing work for the long term. And we've got evidence of that because some groups have come back to do second and third projects, and at the beginning where they were much more about engagement and engaging people in heritage, they're now a balance of engagement and recording that activity and then thinking about preserving that for the long term. So some of the groups we've worked with on multiple projects include Crescent Radio, which did an initial project called Kashmiri Lives about people in Rochdale from Kashmir, and it explored different aspects of their identity and their language, Pahari, and their migration stories. They've more recently they're just finishing a project called East African Asian Lives, which is about people from Uganda and Tanzania and Kenya who were of South Asian origin, who because of Idi Amin and the expulsion of people from that area during the 1970s, were migrated to the UK. They've talked about their experiences of that on the record. And that project, because most of the people migrated in the 1980s, has been quite rare in documenting explicitly issues around racism and racial prejudice in Britain in the 1970s, which is really interesting because although that underpins most of the work we do has an anti-racism agenda and is about sharing stories and experiences around multicultural Britain. A lot of the time we struggle to get people to speak on the record about explicit experiences of racism. It still feels quite difficult and uncomfortable for people to do that, but this project, because it's got a really rich relationship with the people that it's conducting interviews with, has managed to capture that, so it's really precious. And we've got other projects. We worked with the Malawi Heritage project, which was focused on relationships and marriage, and they've just put in a second application to look at childbirth and parenting within the same community. And again, what's been really interesting in terms of progression is that the communities are thinking about how to capture 360-degree views of their community and not just repeatedly interviewing the same types of people over again. So that project's run by an evangelical church, but they've actually managed to interview people who are single parents, who are divorced, who are married, who are in multi-faith relationships, who are Muslims as well. So it's, and Crescent Radio too has interviewed both Muslims and Christians and first, second and third generation migration experiences. So what we're finding over time is that we're getting more nuanced stories, we're getting more difficult and contentious histories on the record, we're getting more trust and engagement, we're getting more long-term thinking and archiving. So they've been some of the really nice success stories.
Thanks so much, Jenny. It's great. I always love hearing about the project and the work that you do at the centre. I can't kind of overstate enough the value of projects such as this one, mainly because there's such little similar activity elsewhere in the heritage sector to this kind of level of real community engagement and real kind of community collaboration, and that real sense of partnership. For example, when you were speaking about getting kind of talking with communities about what other people might want to kind of understand and know about their heritage, and not just kind of having quite a kind of like narrow perspective, but also in terms of demystifying how the heritage sector works. I think that's so important to be able to kind of really build trust and partnership with people, to be able to just talk quite frankly about how the whole system works, and not just, I guess there's often been a tendency across many museums and archives to kind of see diversity and diverse collecting as something that's quite an add-on, and it's quite distinct, and it's just about, you know, acquiring those collections, and it's not about building those real kind of partnerships and collaborations. So I think it's such valuable work. And just to pick up on, I mean, you mentioned the Bolton Asian Migration Project, which I did a lot of reading around, and it's really interesting from a sporting point of view, because I think it's the organisation is based in the Dean and Derby Cricket Club, I think, in Bolton, and there's a lot of material relating to Dean and Derby. There's a lot of material relating to other kind of Asian grassroots clubs around the Bolton area, and there's a real sense of like how the role sport plays within those communities, and the importance of sport, but also, you know, the meaning, the kind of community meanings of sport, I guess, which you don't always kind of see in other collections or in other aspects of sporting heritage. And you know, you're talking at the end there about racism and getting people to open up about topics like that, which might kind of seem a bit further removed from sport, but what we found within the Ignored Sport and Heritage Project was that sport is a real vehicle to kind of talk about all sorts of experiences and all sorts of kind of community challenges and the difficulties and challenges that people have faced. And it's so, I think, yeah, what I'm getting at is that while that might seem kind of like further removed from sport, I think the politics and the challenges that people have faced, it's there's definitely real opportunity for sport to kind of contribute to those conversations and to kind of like act as a vehicle and kind of shine a light on the kind of wider issues around communities, and so yeah, it's such a fascinating project, and I really love.
There's a great project to do about football as a unifier for speakers of other languages. We've recorded that incidentally on quite a few of our projects, where people have talked about, you know, that being able to make friends without speaking the same language, and being able to settle either as an adult or a child through certain activities without needing the language. And a few years before coming from the call, we worked with Manchester Refugee Support Network, which is an overriding organisation, an umbrella sort of organisation that supports grassroots community support organisations working with refugees. And they hold a World Cup every year where they people from different communities play each other in football. And it kind of is a brilliant way of bringing people together, you know, and they've got things in common, but they've also kind of got their group solidarity. And yeah, it comes up time and again. It's a really ripe idea for exploring as a project in its own right.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think it's fascinating how often kind of football and, well, sports more widely, but usually football kind of steps into that void where kind of community cohesion is like an issue, and there are barriers. And I was thinking, specifically, I read an article a few months ago about Grenfell FC, which has emerged in the kind of wake of Grenfell Tower, and how that's become like a real kind of hub for all of the various communities in that kind of part of London, and how powerful it can be, I guess, just to kind of like have something that everyone can relate to and kind of unify around, and even, as you say, like almost act as a language, because where language barriers exist. So yeah, I think there's such opportunity to, if we can kind of like start linking and engaging with those communities and bring those perspectives into sporting heritage, to really explore the role that sport plays in that capacity. So yeah, it's fascinating. I could go on. But no, thank you so much. That was really, 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 really insightful. And there are the two links there, as Jenny mentioned, Race Archive with tons of resources, so have a look. And coming from the cold was the project blog that you mentioned, or the project website that you mentioned. And I think there was something quite useful found in there, which was that Museums Association article, which has a few kind of bullet points. I'm not sure if that's available elsewhere as well, but if you want a kind of really quick but insightful instruction to kind of community engagement, there's a really useful article on that website. But yeah, no, thank you so much again. And just to clarify, yeah, should have time for a few questions in a bit. But what I was hoping to do now is just quickly ask you, the people who have joined us today, find out a bit more about which collections you represent and your collecting practices. And I wondered if you're willing, whether it's okay to go around. Fran, would you be able to like go around your Zoom room?
Shall I do it once around the screen? Do you want to stop your screen share, Chris?
Yes.
And then we can bring it up. So lovely. Right, yeah, so we've got about 15 minutes left of the session. That was really interesting. I was busy looking at your website while you were chatting, Jenny. So there's masses and masses on there. I'd really like to come and have a chat with you about some of that. I know that you're finishing off. And I know that we've got a whole mix of people in the room today. So if everyone would like to just give a really quick introduction, just talk about your collections and how you have or how you would like to engage with this sort of topic. It only needs to be brief so that we can just see sort of the experience in the room. So where shall I start? Sarah, do you want to start?
I'm Sarah Priestley. I'm the curator at Watford Museum and also curator for Watford Football Club. And we work on an extensive range of projects to do with women in football, LGBTQ, diverse history, and sort of building up some of the themes that we've been talking about today. A lot of our work is very much focused. We work officially with the club, but we also work with fans a lot. And we're also not just a football museum, so we're looking at grassroots sports in our area, everything from local Paralympians through to boxers. So it's quite a broad sort of area.
It would help if I wasn't on mute, wouldn't it? Lovely, thanks, Sarah. Joan, would you like to go next?
Yes, I'm Joan Mills. I chair the England Netball Archive Group. I found the two presentations quite interesting this morning, and I'd be really interested to hear what other sports have to say about race relations within their sport and diversity, because it's a problem that I feel that we've never had in netball. And when this subject came up a month or so ago, and when I looked at our current England team, which consists of 12 players, it was absolutely split 50-50 with white players and non-white players. And I asked lots of my non-white friends if they'd ever had any problems within netball from from a racist point of view, and they said no. And we were asked within the last 6 months or so, after the Black Lives Matter Day, we were asked by the England board if we would actually set up a special section within our archives for the ethnic minorities. And I'm afraid I said no. I'm open for further comment, because to me, and this is my own personal point of view, is if we did that, we are saying that people are different. And to me, they're not. They're sports people, they're netball players, they're passionate about the game that we all love, and they're just netball players. It doesn't matter where they come from, what their background is, what colour they are. So I'd be really interested to hear what the other sports people that we've got on here today, you know, where they're coming from with that. I probably didn't answer your question, but I need to get that off my chest.
No, that's fine. Lovely. Thanks, Jen. Well, I think we'll come back and pick up on that as part of our discussion. Amy, would you like to go next?
Hi, I'm Amy from Lexington, so I'm right in the middle of Cumbria, and I work at the Windermere Jetty, which is a steamboat and sailing boat museum. And I actually work in participation and learning. I'm not in curatorial, I'm not about collecting, I'm not about archives or anything. I do a bit of oral history when I'm doing my community engagement. But one project that we would really like to get involved in is the second largest ethnic group in Cumbria is the Romani travellers. And we also have the Appleby Fair, which is lots and lots of sport. My family is from a sporting background, so that's one of the reasons I came to this, because I was really interested in, you know, we're kind of out in the middle of nowhere here, and it's a bit of a strange place to collect diverse stories. So I just thought it was interesting on how we can engage. But I realised from what Jenny said that those relationships take a very long time. And I know that with the Romani community, there's a lot of barriers to creating those kind of partnerships. So, but I've found some really interesting stuff here. I'm definitely going to have a look on your coming out from the cold thing. Thank you very much.
Lovely, thanks, Amy. Brian, do you want to go next?
Hello, yes, I'm Brian Morell, also from the England Netball Archive Group. Absolutely support what Joan has said. It wasn't just Joan's view in netball about differentiating between parts of our community. The netball community, or the netball family in general, has always been, we just see people playing on the court. I suspect there are one or two points where we have had racial discrimination, possibly down at the very grassroots level, but by and large, it doesn't figure in our community. However, this workshop has majored on museums, and what we are, the Netball Archive Group, is an archive. We don't have a museum as such. To access our material, you either have to go online, where the material is largely pictorial, and hence there's no minutes of meetings and stuff like that on our online presence, or you have to go to the search room at Heritage Key, which is in the University of Huddersfield, and access our stuff that way. We have pretensions of actually having a total online presence eventually, if we can get the funding to digitize all our minutes and handbooks and magazines and that sort of stuff. But that is a long-term project, but it's in mind for the future, and we can work. So I have a question really for Jennifer, in that I know that we are underrepresented in things like the Muslim community. As an example, we are underrepresented in other parts. I don't think we have a problem with LGBT, by the way, either. I may be wrong, but as far as I know, we all muck in together. We are underrepresented in some ways by men, because it is largely a female sport. But I don't think we kick up a fuss too much about that. We're interested in accessing the Asian community, the Muslim community, perhaps the Hindu community, things like that. And we haven't really, and hope Joan doesn't mind me saying this because she's my chairman, we haven't really got to grips with that. And partly that's because as a group, we are an advisory group to the England Netball Board. So therefore we can only advise what we should be doing about our netball heritage. At least that's the theory. We do push the board at times, but so we have a problem. If you just take, say the Muslim community, if you look at that, they have a cultural issue, I guess, when it comes to the way they dress to play netball. But in the wider context, we, the heritage group, can in a sense only target that area, that community, if there are enough netball players playing it. To get enough netball players playing it, the England netball strategy has in itself to target those communities with activities within their strategy. That's the way it seems to me anyway, and it's a discussion I have not had with anybody within the community, within the netball family. So this is a personal Brian Worrell comment. And from what Jennifer has just been saying, I'm going to explore that, because it seems to me that whilst we don't discriminate between netball players once they're in a sense within the netball family, it may well be that we have opportunities here through our strategy to actually develop netball in areas that we haven't actually targeted significantly in the past. And one other comment, if I may, one of our goals now, which we're starting to work on, is to widen the network of our history. We deal primarily with national heritage, although there's quite a lot of grassroots of stuff within that because it's driven nationally. But we have 12 regions, we have 54 counties, we have an enormous number of leagues, an enormous number of clubs, and many of these people or these local organisations are beginning to think about their own histories. Now, in Manchester, interestingly, we have a very strong netball community, and it may well be that part of our growing our network, we could encourage somebody in Manchester, in the netball community in Manchester, to start a project rather similar to what Jenny was talking about. And I'm definitely going to have a look at your resources, Jennifer, because I think if there are stuff on there which will guide us in how to actually widen our network and indeed perhaps conduct a sports netball in the community type project within Manchester, that would achieve two aims and it'd be a win-win for us within the netball community. I don't know if you've got any comments on that, but because I'm talking off the top of my head, having listened with interest to what you've been doing, and thank you for that.
Just before we open it up for discussion, if we just quickly finish the once around the screen, and then we'll have a group discussion in the time we've got left. But thank you, Brian. I think there's lots of interesting points in there that we can pick up on. Fernando, would you like to go next?
Yeah, hi, thank you, Fran. Well, I'm Fernando, I'm a trainee at Archaeology Scotland. We're based in Musselburgh, and we recently have kickstarted one of our projects, which is based on new audiences, and we kickstarted it in Hampden. I don't know if anybody came across that, but it's very related to sporting heritage and also to the idea of diversifying a little bit and offering the community their own heritage, really just facilitating it for them. So yeah, I found everything really interesting. We don't really collect or anything, but like everything is just gold, really. So thank you.
Lovely, thank you. And last but by no means least, Sian, would you like to introduce yourself? Oh, we can't hear you, Sian.
There we go. Can you hear me now?
Oh yes, that's better. Yeah.
Yeah. Hi. Yeah. Sorry, I'm a passenger in a car at the moment.
That's dedication.
But I wanted to come along. I don't know. I'm going to tell my video so I can hear me hopefully. So I'm a PhD student working with the Tottenham Hotspur Foundation, and part of my research is going to be working with underrepresented fan communities. And hopefully encouraging the club to collect from those communities as well, which they don't do at the moment. But yeah, that's me.
Lovely, thanks, Sian. So we've got a few minutes left. So if I don't know if Jenny or Chris, you'd like to pick up on any of the points that have been raised.
Can I address a couple of points that came up? One is that where I work, it's an archive and library, so we don't have anything to come and visit either. And I was really interested in that comment because, you know, I come from a museum and I'm actually an artist, so the lack of visual stuff really stumped me when I got this job. I was like, how do you get people interested in this? And that's why we did a lot of work around demystifying what an archive is. And we've also, you know, we've invested a lot during the project in the website and trying to, it was a very static platform, and what we've tried to do is upload downloadable resources, moving images, we've tried to also run projects that get people to respond to our collections, so there's more engaging and visible content. We got a group of students to do some research in our archive, and then we linked them up with communities running heritage projects, and they produce short films for us, which are on our website to view. And they also, so they're 5-minute films, they give you an idea of the relationship and the people, but then you, hopefully you're interested and you go and explore the archive as well. We've got a small amount of digitized stuff on Archives Hub that you can look through. And we've also, we also do a lot of work. Oral history is really good because you can upload excerpts to SoundCloud, and what we've been trying to do is release, we never release full interviews because of copyright issues and disclosure, but we produce like albums of excerpts, and we upload those to give people a flavour of what an archive contains before they commit to coming to visit us in the library. So there's a lot of stuff you can do to get people interested remotely before they commit to coming on a visit to see you. And I think you can be quite imaginative. You know, we were looking at doing animation workshops and things to try and get people interested in our archive through different routes, and trying to find it through different ways as well. So putting the information out on like social media like Instagram and things like that, so you get different audiences. So you have to do a lot of work, really, is the answer to that one. But there are ways of getting people interested. And I was just pondering the second point around diversity or lack of diversity within a particular sector. And I think some of what you're saying reflects, like, I think Chris picked up on this, and that the report has shown that whatever issues are inherent within the sector are obviously then what becomes, you know, the heritage or the archivable kind of side of that as well. So I mean, I don't think you can make netball more diverse through your heritage, you know, by just working on the archive, but you could look at what is being done and how to document that process. So if the Netball Association have initiatives to try and increase diversity, what are you collecting around that, and how do you make sure that the voices are not just the Netball Association representatives, but the people that they're trying to engage in that process as well? So, you know, how do you reach out to those people about whether it's been successful or not? And what I would always say is we used to initiate projects at our centre, and we were still doing that to some extent, but what we've moved to doing a lot more is supporting people to run their own projects. So trying to find where there are groups doing things that are interesting, and then going to them and saying, look, we're a heritage organisation, we can support you with this, this and this, would you like our help? How can we, do you think a mini project would be interesting? And that can start with just documenting what already exists. So if there are kind of Muslim girls groups who are running netball you know, events or tournaments, what can you collect, and how can you have a conversation with them, and then how can you kind of turn that into you know, a bigger project? So I think it's sort of slowly, as Amy said, it's a really long process, and you're not going to do it overnight, but it's like trying to find people where they are, then trying to document what they're doing, and then build on that to eventually run a project. I think that's how I'd do it.
I definitely agree with what Jenny said, and I don't know enough about netball to comment on your comments around diversity in netball. I can see two dogs' legs, but it sounds to me like there's similar comparisons to football, in that, I mean, a lot of people point to football as being a hugely multicultural and diverse sport, which it is, and it's unarguable that football is certainly a kind of emblematic aspect of our society in terms of inclusion and diversity. But what a lot of people make the mistake of doing, I guess, is suggesting that because there are a lot of Black players in professional football nowadays, but if you look at, say, South Asian players, which you made the comment on before, there were only 8 across the Premier League, across the English Football League. So you're talking like multiple tiers of football, there were only 8 South Asian heritage players out of about 3,000 plus players in football. And when you look at, you know, the I guess the demographics of society, people of South Asian heritage are a much greater proportion than people of, say, African heritage. And so can you say football is truly diverse when it doesn't include such a large element of society? And equally, some people kind of, I guess, make similar comments around the fact that, you know, there aren't enough South Asian people trying to get into football, but then by exploring, you can see that there's many grassroots Asian football clubs. There are many kind of structures and tournaments shaped around South Asian communities, and it actually kind of like belies that assumption. So I think, in a sense, I think it's not looking at diversity purely as being kind of like inclusive of people who aren't white, but it's looking at how well it represents our society and how well it represents that kind of, yeah, the actual kind of demographics and people involved in sport. So, and I think that's the real challenge, especially with sport, is that really there's a lot to be done to kind of, I guess, challenge those assumptions, but also to really explore the meanings of sport across communities and try and really kind of like identify how different communities connect with different sports. And that's where I think the real work is, and as Jenny was saying, to just understand like what is really kind of happening in communities, and what is it that can be kind of like built upon, and what can be captured and preserved and documented. But I think it is certainly a challenge that different sports do tend to have different connections with different communities. It's not a kind of, again, one size fits all across all sports in terms of representation. So I think it's a really valid point to say, you know, that different sports do have different levels of participation. But yeah, I'm aware we're kind of,
yes, we're sort of come to the end of our time, but if anybody's got any other comments they would like to make before we bring the session to a close, I think this is a discussion that can run and run, and I hope that if you've been interested in this session, that you'll join us for the second and third sessions that we've got running. And I think, you know, this thread is something that's definitely running through Sporting Heritage's work at the moment. So hopefully there'll be more opportunity to discuss this, particularly if you do start projects, or if you go and look at Jenny's resources and you know, find them useful, we can then come back and sort of discuss and reflect on that. So is there any final comments? No, everybody's quiet.
thank you very much for coming on, and thank you so much for your comments and input and interest as well. I'm really grateful for you taking the time, and I'll just say thanks again to Jenny as well for joining us today, who to share the fantastic project and her really unique insight. And do follow up on those links and make the most of those resources, because it's all about just, I guess, harvesting as much as you can and getting as many different perspectives and insights as you can, and just building on that, because it's not something that we can kind of figure out overnight. But yeah, thank you again. And the next workshop is next Friday, and we'll have Charlotte Goodhue joining us from the MCC Museum at Lord's, talk about projects on women in cricket. And then the following Friday we've got Sarah, who's here with us today, and talk about Watford's work with Watford fans and supporters and the club to develop community-driven collecting. So thank you again, and I hope to see you all again soon.
I'll send a wrap-up email with the link to this recording and all the links that were in the chat as well. So yes, thank you very much for your time this morning, and yeah, see you soon.